Hello and welcome to Bite Size History, History of the United Kingdom, brought to you by AI Cast. I'm your host Aidan. In this episode, we will explore the burial rites and rituals of the Bronze Age in Britain. Burial was a central aspect of Bronze Age society, and it played an important role in shaping the cultural landscape of the period. The Bronze Age saw the emergence of new burial practices and rituals, which reflected the changing beliefs and values of the people of the time. The Bronze Age was a period of great social and cultural change in Britain. With the arrival of the beaker culture, new ideas, technologies, and practices became available, and these helped to create a sense of shared identity and culture across the region. Burial was one of the key areas in which these changes were reflected. Bronze Age burial practices were diverse and varied, depending on factors such as region, social status, and cultural influence. However, there were some common themes and elements that can be discerned across the period. For example, burial was often accompanied by the use of grave goods, which were objects that were buried with the deceased to accompany them into the afterlife. The nature of the grave goods varied depending on the social status and occupation of the individual. Wealthy and powerful individuals were often buried with more elaborate and valuable grave goods, such as weapons, jewelry, and other items of luxury. In contrast, poorer individuals were often buried with more modest grave goods, such as simple pottery vessels or stone tools. The use of grave goods was not the only important element of Bronze Age burial, however. The location and form of burial was also significant. Burial mounds, or barrows, were a common feature of Bronze Age burial, and these were often located in prominent positions in the landscape. Burial in a mound was seen as a way of connecting the deceased with the natural world, and it was thought to have spiritual significance. The construction of burial mounds was often a communal effort, and it required significant labor and resources. The size and complexity of the mound often reflected the social status and importance of the individual being buried. The construction of a large and elaborate mound was a way of demonstrating the wealth and power of the deceased, and it helped to reinforce their social status and prestige. The construction of burial mounds was also a way of reinforcing social connections and networks. Burial mounds often contained the remains of multiple individuals, and this suggests that they were used by extended families or other social groups. The construction of a burial mound was a way of strengthening these social connections and networks, and it helped to create a sense of shared identity and culture within the group. Another important aspect of Bronze Age burial was the use of ritual and ceremony. Burial was often accompanied by a range of rituals and ceremonies, which were intended to honor the deceased and help them transition into the afterlife. These rituals often involved the use of music, dance, and other forms of performance, and they were an important way of expressing grief and mourning. The specific nature of these rituals and ceremonies varied depending on the culture and beliefs of the individual or group. For example, some cultures believed in the use of human sacrifice or other forms of bloodletting as a way of appeasing the gods and ensuring a successful transition to the afterlife. Other cultures focused more on the use of music, dance, and other forms of artistic expression to honor the deceased and express grief. In conclusion, Bronze Age burial rites and rituals were a complex and diverse aspect of the period. Burial was a central aspect of Bronze Age society, and it played an important role in shaping the cultural landscape of the period. The use of grave goods, the construction of burial mounds, and the use of ritual and ceremony were all key elements of Bronze Age burial, and they reflected the changing beliefs and values of the people of the time. Burial practices varied depending on social status, occupation, and cultural influence, but there were some common themes and elements that can be discerned across the period. The use of grave goods, for example, reflected the importance of material possessions and social status in Bronze Age society. The construction of burial mounds demonstrated the wealth and power of the deceased, and it reinforced social connections and networks within the group. The use of ritual and ceremony helped to express grief and honor the deceased, and it reflected the belief in an afterlife or spiritual realm. Bronze Age burial practices also had significant implications for the wider society and culture of the period. Burial mounds and other forms of commemoration became important landmarks in the landscape, and they helped to reinforce a sense of shared identity and culture across different communities. The use of grave goods created new opportunities for trade and exchange, and it helped to create new economic networks and connections. The use of ritual and ceremony created new forms of artistic expression and performance, and it helped to create new cultural practices and traditions. In conclusion, the Bronze Age in Britain was a period of significant social and cultural change, and burial practices were one of the key areas in which these changes were reflected. The use of grave goods, the construction of burial mounds, and the use of ritual and ceremony were all important aspects of Bronze Age burial, and they helped to shape the cultural landscape of the period. The diversity and complexity of Bronze Age burial practices reflect the dynamic and innovative nature of the period, and they demonstrate the importance of burial as a central aspect of Bronze Age society. Thank you for listening. If you liked the show, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time on Bite Size History.